Awesome. So the solver just returned. So yeah, we have a panel on intents. So let's just introduce ourselves. I'm Sarang. I used to lead engineering at SushiSwap, and I'm an advisor to them. And I'm going to tell everybody to give like a 10 words definition of what you think intent is. For me, it is whatever I don't know how to do it. Like I just give it on the intents. Just people to do it. That's intent for me.
Hi, my name is Kirill. I am the lead backend engineer at 1inch, where we are working on on-chain aggregation and also intents, our fusion protocol. For me, intents, it's something hard that can be simple for the user, and professional market makers will do everything for user.
Hi, Mounir, founder of Paraswap in Portuguese. I believe intent is a simplification of user objectives that we use in our daily life. Like an example of booking an Uber, we don't get to tell Uber what to do, we just tell Uber where are we going, and we just push a button and it's done for us.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Adrian. I'm co-founder of Anoma. An intent is a partial state transition. You say exactly what you want. You want to go from A to B. You don't care about how it's computed because you've sort of cryptographically committed that you have A and you want B, and then someone else can figure out the actual compute, and you don't care whether there's one counterparty, 1,000 counterparties, 15 different bridges. It doesn't matter. You just define A to B, and the rest is figured out by someone else.
So I'm Alex. I do product marketing at CowSwap, and for me, intents are limit orders? No. I mean, I agree with what everyone has saying. It's basically a way to just express what you want to do, and then, especially within this tech, because it's so complicated, it's like, I don't care, just figure it out, and then I know I want to get B, and like it's what Mounir said, I know I want to get there, just figure out the route and how to pick me up, and that's it.
Awesome. So since I'm a smart contract dev, one of the questions that I have is, while building smart contract applications, I've not seen a lot of them interacting to intent-based architecture recently, right? There's still some of them coming up. So what are the best ways that, as a smart contract dev, you could recommend me, or tell me some tools, tricks on using your intent apps much more, like a defined manner, and like probably a bit more standardized. I think like you just gave a presentation on that, right?
So I'll give it a short, not to repeat myself, but basically it's developing your smart contract with ERC-1271 signatures, because then you allow the smart contract to kind of create this like is valid signature, and then the order creation is just this function call for the signature and the order digest for, in the case for CowSwap, for Cow Protocol, and that's pretty much an easier way for smart contracts to leverage intents.
Maybe it's important to note here, like the model changes as soon as you have intents. Right now, smart contracts are very imperative, sort of, they actually try to compute things. This is, in my opinion, clearly the wrong model, because sort of shared global compute is pretty expensive, and there's no reason why everyone needs to compute the same 5 values. So like from a developer perspective, the model changes to much more verification. So you sort of define like what are valid state transitions in the system, in my application, and then the application actually just verifies whether a proposed state transition is valid, right? Like if you have a simple trade, A to B, A for B, B for A, in the application you just verify that this balances to 0. You don't actually try to compute the actual thing that's happening. So this is much more moving away from, let me define a imperative sort of execution trace towards applications check declarative state updates, and solvers will figure out exactly what state updates should happen, and then they will submit those, and then the application just verifies, which is why also intents are wonderful for ZK, because this is the model in ZK anyway, where we do compute somewhere else and we do verification in the middle.
It seems like also it's a holy grail for account abstraction developers, who can have intents integrated natively into their app without having to worry about a lot of details, because now we have a lot of devs who are, I would say in the space for a while, they understand how smart contracts work and all of that. But I think the next million developers that will join the space, they don't need to understand all the details besides what Adrian said, maybe verifying and proving that what happens indeed happens as expected, but they can focus mostly on their business logic and delivering the best possible service to their users.
Actually, because I just had a thought here, which is something I think as a developer, developing applications is just an order of magnitude easier if you're in this declarative framework and more secure, because you don't have to worry about like whether your execution trace is correct. You can just go and just, like, verification is just easier to build.
Yeah, but I think that this is a paradigm change as well, right? Because with smart contract, you want atomicity of operations when the user executes it, right? Like either it happens or it doesn't. But in this case, like I was actually trying to integrate like 1-inch limit orders, so I had to create callbacks on my contracts, wait for the operation to happen, wait for your contracts to submit, and then the application flows, kind of moves to the next step. So I think like this, there's this new ideal like paradigm that we need to be worried about, and when we develop apps, which not a lot of people might be catered to, right? So.
Yeah, basically, as everyone said, Intents, it's pretty simple architecture where you just need to sign some message and submit to some relayer. But on top of this signature, you can add a lot of business logic, conditions, etc. Like you said, in limit orders. Besides the signature, you can provide some interaction and, for example, make deposits to lending protocols. For example, you can make a leverage trading with it. You can provide liquidity within the single limit order, so you can do any action.
That makes sense. So the other question I have is like, up to what extent we are basically making like the intent architecture centralized? So like back like 8-9 months, 10 months ago, like where intents were very hot, like everybody wanted to know what that is and integrate it. But now like 10 months later, we find that most of the protocols which actually have intents, or like mainly for order execution, right? There are only very, very less solvers filling it, and that too take up a majority share. I was just reading an article in the morning which said that Token Labs and Benchemled does 80% of Uniswap X's volume. We have similar numbers for 1-inch, CowSwap, and other exchanges as well, right? Would that reduce the solver competition and kind of, increase the monopoly of certain solvers into the space? If yes, then how do we solve it?
So if we are talking about the centralization in the high efficient DeFi trading system, you need some kind of balance between the decentralization and centralization. And from our point of view, the main thing that should be decentralized, it's order execution itself, it's the price, and other stuff we can delegate to some peer-to-peer network or just a backend just for storage to distribute the orders to the professional market makers. And so it's makes sense to keep some part of the architecture centralized, but you should always perform an execution on chain.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, so theoretically it's fine that it'd be actually okay if you only have one solver. This is not structurally a problem because solvers can't front run, like users sign over specific state updates. So like as a user, it doesn't hurt you if there's only one global solver. Like if one person builds a universal solver that is going to be the fastest and cheapest for everyone, I think that'd actually be fine. The important thing is you want to decentralize the architecture so that, or you want to have an architecture where the topology can shift. For example, as soon as one solver starts behaving badly, like as in they try to censor you, there's an easy way for other people to hook into this. So like, I think what really matters is, and not enough people in the space ever think about this, is how do you actually build resilient P2P gossip networks that can sort of handle arbitrary intents that then solvers can sit on top. I think this is really by far the most important thing, that we want to have the capability that at any moment I can decide on my own solver. Like either I can say, well, I only want to interact actually with this one guy, or we can all switch away from this one guy because he's starting to censor half of this. Like solving should never be this is, for example, also why I think like having closed source provers in ZK is horrendously bad, because this is effectively, now you've created a lock-in for one solver to always be the only available solver, and then you have centralization problems. So you want to build architectures that are topology agnostic, where topology can flow from actual user behavior, where if people want to switch away to a different solver, they can easily do this. And this even comes not even from the censorship resistant way, but even think of this in terms of latency, right? Latency really matters, and latency is fundamentally determined by speed of light. Like, if we want to get this faster execution, we should do local solving in this room, because we can have like fiber optic cables between our machines right now. This will, like, no chain will ever be faster than this, unless they break the laws of physics. And so you want to have architectures that support, either we can have a global solver, because maybe I care about cost, but not latency. But maybe I also, when I really care about latency, I want to have the same architecture should be able to support that I can like easily roam between all these different topologies.
I mean, I think, so for one hand, it shouldn't matter if it's centralized, like at least the like input of creating the intents. What should matter is like that, you know, kind of like the availability to access these intents is decentralized. But at the same time, like going a little bit on what you say, it's a little bit like idealistic to kind of think that there's not going to be centralization, because there are all these other things like latency and like, I don't know, you know, vertical integrations that lead to centralization. Like, we haven't solved this yet at the Ethereum level with builders, for example, where like, yeah, this system with PBS was supposed to be more open and more decentralized, and yet it has actually made it more centralized. And we have builders, which I'm not getting into the point that if they should or they shouldn't, it's up to each person to decide, like, you know, what laws they follow and whatever, but it is happening that it's censoring. And yet, if from the chain level we can't really figure it out, it's kind of, I don't know if naive or very idealistic to think that at a much lower stack, which is even harder to deal with, we're gonna be able to solve it, at least in the short term.
I would say that, like in PBS, the problem though is that builders exist, but no one really worried about how to build an opt-in network stack that where you can easily like reconnect. So as a result, like we are locked into these like couple of handful of builders that that are the only people that actually are connected to the relays, and the validators only connect to like 2 relays, effectively maybe 3, right? I actually think long-term latency really plays in our favor, because latency is like the one thing you can't get away from. And so like this, I think, will heavily favor localized solving and very decentralized solving, because this is by far going to be the lowest latency thing.
It's also an open market, right? Because the most efficient players are always going to be winning. We see that in exchanges in general. Like, you see centralized or decentralized exchanges, you will always have one party dominating others simply because it's more efficient. And also in Ethereum, we have Lido that's taking a large share, not because the system is decentralized. Like Ethereum design, I agree with the idea that the design should be decentralized, should maximize on the core design architecture, decentralization, but also they will always have actors that will emerge simply because they are more efficient than others.
Yeah. So you mean to say like Lido should get 50%? I'm just joking, I won't get you cancelled, you know? So yeah, that actually drives me towards my next question is, you know, that, okay, like on Ethereum, you had flashbots that lets you access, you know, a lot of MEV stuff in a much easier fashion. Before that, people could still do it, but they have to go talk to, you know, a lot of like Chain, like these Chinese miners to get those transactions in, and they were used to do it on very case-to-case basis, right? Flashbot made it available for all. We have now, you know, like before 4337, people still used to have gasless transaction, but they had all of that in the private mempool kind of thing, right? This is what the scenario, what I feel is for the intents, right? 1inch has private, Anoma, CowSwap, they all have their own private and like, you know, permission pools where like, if I just want to go write solving for it, I couldn't do it as easily as, you know, I would be able to run a validated node on Ethereum, right, for instance. Or maybe like participate in the 4337 network, right? So does that call for a standard for you guys to kind of collaborate and share your orders? Or is that something you would not want to do because that's coming from your order flow, you know?
So Anoma doesn't care. Anoma is its infrastructure, right? Like it's just intents. We don't know what those intents do. They may be messages, they may be trades, who cares? Yeah. So in that sense, if you want to build an application on top of this, sure, you can make the choice to have private order flow that you do not gossip on, right? Like a front end could make a choice that you only submit, the front end only submits it to one, effectively one solver, and this becomes now private order flow. Yeah. But there's nothing in the architecture restricting this. It's like, I think in the end it will come down to, if we build open architectures, it comes down to user behavior of whether they want to take advantage of these open architectures. I think this is actually one of the big problems with flashbots and like the entire thing in Ethereum. Like at the moment we're at this very ad hoc thing where like a bunch of IP addresses are fixed, and it's very difficult for users to actually influence the topology. And so as a result, we're seeing some amount of centralization here. And I really hope that like Anoma's intent machine for Ethereum can start addressing some of this, where it's like, can we make this a more open architecture that where users can more easily pick where they like what the topology should look like.
Yeah. I mean, like in L2s, right? Now you guys have a lot of power because L2s don't have anything like flashbots, right? Like I'm not like maybe let's say in case of Arbitrum, right? We hope that Arbitrum sequences doesn't MEV us out, but you guys can because you guys are getting the native order flow in most cases, right? Shouldn't this power be kind of like shared between all of us as a user? Because as a user, I might get bad execution on one of these.
I mean, yes and no. Like, because the problem with the standards is that they're kind of like self-interest and opinionated. And unless you go like the ANOMA route and kind of, which maybe Ethereum should do or not, like this is the standard for everyone or like for all this network. And then applications decide like how you treat them and like how you want to create your own architectures. Or else it's just going to be opinionated. And then ultimately like the leader of the standard is going to, you know, sweep the standard towards their infrastructure.
Yeah. I mean, they're always going to be opinionated, right? There's standards of standards of standards, right? But you still got to pull off something, you know?
Yeah, there is a small problem with standards that each protocol try their best to optimize the smart contracts as much as possible in terms of gas usage for the solver. Like, because the user's price also depends on the gas cost of the solver. If the protocol itself consumes a lot of gas, it will not be so profitable for the user. That means that each protocol trying to optimize each of their functionality as much as possible. And if we will have some shared standard how to do this, there is a way that the smart contracts would not be gas optimized as much as we can.
But I would add that this field is still in its infancy. We've been talking about intent like when you guys launched 2 years ago. Building standards at this time may not be efficient for innovation because we haven't discovered yet what is the best design. So we still have a lot of opinions, a lot of projects working on decentralization, working on improving the flow, on maximizing the supply side. Like you mentioned, we still have this centralization on the supply side. How do we get more solvers? How do we make the barrier to entry lower? We see now some DEXs building their own solvers so that they can fulfill their very specific intents, specific use case, sorry. So I believe it's still early. It may happen maybe 10 years from now or 20 years from now, who knows. But still we have a long way of innovation and discovering what is the best possible model that will be built in. I think this will take some time.
And at the same time, it's kind of feels wrong from the point of view of like an open market to dictate how like the application should kind of deal with these intents or kind of order structures, because it would be like as if suddenly like, I don't know, the internet market tells like all these internet companies how they should optimize their servers in this way, or they're not allowed to actually, you know, play the game. So it's like, why would an open market say, I have to treat this in this way? Unless there is an infrastructure point of view that then you're like, okay, because, you know, we kind of verify or trigger the transaction in this way, like in the internet, no, HTTPS or TCP, like it just works this way. And you have to figure out your architecture around it. That's it.
I think the biggest reason for, really like, I mean, we started thinking about intents like 3 years ago kind of thing. And I think we were by far the first. I think like a year later, the next sort of wave of people started thinking about this. And so generalized intents are just coming. I think this is sort of the biggest takeaway. But the one reason why I'm pretty optimistic, but that we'll see sort of a convergence in the architecture, is because you defragment the liquidity, especially on the trading side, right? Like if every application ends up having its own standard, this is fine, they can live at the same time, but most likely the actual generalized standard will win or like will propagate long term because it can provide better pricing to users, because users now don't have to decide what specific application to trade with, but rather can decide where the best price is. Like users can effectively say, I don't care whether I'm on CowSwap or 1inch or something like this. I just care, give me quickest execution, lowest latency, lowest cost, whatever, right? And so this is, I think, the really strong argument for why generalized intents would actually be, like end up providing better UX to users in the end.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
And just to add on one thing you said, like on the fragmentation liquidity and like how with the standards, we haven't been able, like within DeFi, to standardize one stablecoin. How many versions of USD is there out there? And yet, it's the most simple thing, right? One stable, I don't know, 2 stablecoins.
Yeah.
There's
Why not?
10,000.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. What are your favorite use cases for intents apart from orders, swaps, and trades?
Scale-free money. Scale-free money. It's
What do you think could be like an emerging use cases? Because most people, when they hear intent, they just think of this, right? But they're more than that. So
Payment, that's a pain point I had personally when I receive USDC and I want to use it. And it was a big hassle because I need to load my wallet with gas and which wallet I should use. Once I had to do an on-ramp, which is not very DeFi at all, but yeah, just to get the gas. I think for payment, that should be something like a big use case that should be seen in the future. Anything that abstracts the usage of crypto to the masses, that they don't care about how the backend works, like how the complexity of the magic that is done on the backend. They just worried about pushing a button, like worried about their use case. They just want to push a button and get the stuff done, and they don't need to know more.
makes sense.
I think the other really big use, like it's outside of financial assets. It's like, because generalized intents effectively just just have this idea that you outsource compute, right? Like you may outsource compute over trades, but you can also outsource compute over other things, like ZK proofs. And I think so intents will actually end up being a lot of about how do we outsource compute to third-party solvers in a way that is very dynamic and flexible, so that individual users can make choices on sort of who they actually trust here. And the other thing is, as soon as you start having this like outsourced compute, you can start building models like scale-free money, where it's like, well, I may be like 15 hops away from the next person that I actually want to pay, but there is a path through the system, and I can pay someone to figure out that path, rather than me having to figure out how do I transfer between all these centralized things or decentralized things. Just like I have X and you want Y, great. There you go, and I'm paying like 5 cents for that actual cost.
I think the good use case is cross-chain operations, when you can issue an intent on one chain and some professional can execute it. And for example, the same bridging, like to give you a token on the one network and receive your token on another network. That's pretty good use case for the intents.
Does from the audience, people have some questions? We're at the end of the panel. Yeah, I think we're good. Thanks for
Thank you.
giving such
Thank you so
insightful
much.
information.